The first murder of 1938 was committed at 12 minutes past midnight, with a weapon that had, moments before, been a symbol of joyous celebration. The final, deafening chime from the grandfather clock had scarcely faded into the cigarette smoke and perfume of Sir Alister Finch Hatton's Art Deco penthouse. The shouts of "Happy New Year" still echoed in that chaotic, sparkling moment of embraces and raised glasses. No one saw the pair of antique champagne coupes, the financier's famed, priceless wedding gift, being taken from their velvet-lined display case by the host himself. He had waved them aloft with a booming, "A private toast" to futures and fortunes, before retreating into his private study, locking the world and his glittering guests behind a mirrored door. He was found 17 minutes later by his tremulous private secretary, Edwin Poole. Sir Alister was slumped in his leather chair behind a vast mahogany desk, a grotesque parody of repose. One exquisite coupe stood empty before him. The other was gone, replaced by a savage glittering shard of its crystal buried in the side of his neck. A crimson tide had flowed onto his starched white shirt front, a stark contrast to the festive gold of his brocade waistcoat. The study was a locked room. The windows, overlooking a sheer drop to the Thames, were fastened. The only key to the door was in the dead man's pocket. The only entrance was from the very drawing room, where 50 of London's elite had been dancing, drinking, and watching that same door with varying degrees of curiosity, envy, or anxiety. Superintendent Stanley Baldwin of Scotland Yard, a man built like a bulldog with a corresponding temperament, surveyed the scene in the harsh light of January 1st. His head throbbed from the remnants of his own, more modest celebration. The suspects, for suspects they all were, had been herded back into the great room, their gaiety extinguished, replaced by a chilled silence. "A nasty, flashy bit of work," grunted Baldwin to his inspector. "But simple. Someone in that crowd picked the lock after he went in, did the deed, and slipped back out during the New Year's hullabaloo. They're counting on the confusion to cover them." The inspector, a younger man, looked doubtful. "The secretary, Poole, says he was watching the door nearly the whole time. Says he never saw it open. And with that band playing, he wouldn't have heard a thing. Then he's lying. Or he's the one who did it," Baldwin stated, his logic blunt and uncompromising. He eyed the assembled party through the study doorway. There was the widow, the breathtakingly beautiful Cordelia Finch Hatton, 25 years her husband's junior, now composed and pale, a black lace shiver around her shoulders. There was Hugo Lester, Sir Alister's fiercest business rival, a man with the sleek menace of a panther, calmly smoking a cigarette as if at his club. There was the aforementioned Edwin Poole, dabbing his forehead with a handkerchief, his every movement twitching with nervous propriety, and a dozen other luminaries, each with a potential motive buried beneath their evening wear. It was Poole who, stammering slightly, provided the suggestion that would change the course of the investigation. "Superintendent," he ventured, "given the delicate nature of the guests and the peculiar circumstances, might I recommend, that is, Sir Alister sometimes consulted, there is a gentleman." Baldwin glared. "Spit it out, man." Poole swallowed. "A gentleman renowned for his discretion and his unique methods. A Monsieur Hercule Poirot. I believe he resides in Whitehaven Mansions. Sir Alister mentioned him once, in relation to a sensitive corporate matter that required subtlety." Baldwin's first instinct was to refuse. He despised outsiders, especially theatrical foreign ones. But the locked room nagged at him. The press would feast on this champagne murder. The commissioner would want a swift, tidy solution, and the evidence so far was anything but tidy. A scapegoat consultant had its uses. "Very well," he barked. "Send for him. But tell him," he added, pointing a thick finger, "he observes. He does not interfere. This is a police matter." As the message was dispatched into the cold London dawn, the suspects waited, shrouded in secrets as thick as the fog now coiling over the river. The champagne in the great room had gone flat, its bubbles dead. Each person present had toasted the new year with Sir Alistair, and one of them, in that brief chaotic window between the chime of midnight and the discovery of the body, had found not hope in the fresh year, but an opportunity for an old festering hatred. The stage was set. All that was required was the arrival of the master. The fog that had greeted the new year still clung to the London streets when Hercule Poirot arrived at Whitehall Gardens. His figure, neat and compact in a black overcoat with an astrakhan collar, was a study in precision against the amorphous grey morning. He was displeased. The order of his universe, a symmetrical breakfast, a review of the day's engagements, the meticulous polishing of his already immaculate shoes, had been shattered by Superintendent Baldwin's summons. A murder. Tout de suite. It was an outrage against method. Yet, the nature of the crime, as boldly outlined by a harried police constable, had piqued the interest of the little grey cells. A locked room, a weapon of crystal, a celebration turned to tragedy. It presented, as he admitted to himself in the taxi, a certain dramatic flair that appealed to his sense of the appropriate. He was admitted to the penthouse by a uniformed constable, his eyes immediately undertaking a swift, comprehensive inventory. The grandeur, the modern lines, the evidence of vast wealth, all were noted and filed away. More importantly, he noted the disarray, chairs pulled askew, abandoned glasses leaving rings on polished surfaces, a lady's sequined wrap tossed over a lampshade. The aftermath of festivity now had the stale, sickly smell of interrupted pleasure and fear. Superintendent Baldwin met him in the foyer, his expression a mixture of impatience and grudging necessity. "Monsieur Poirot?" "Baldwin. This way. It's a nasty, straightforward business, but the locked room nonsense has complicated things for the press. The nonsense, Superintendent, is often the very heart of the business." Poirot replied placidly, removing his gloves with deliberate care. "It is the contradiction that illuminates the truth." He proceeded into the great drawing room, which now served as a holding pen. The suspects were scattered like islands of tension in a sea of anxiety. Poirot did not approach them immediately. Instead, he stood just inside the doorway, his hands clasped behind his back, and observed. It was his first sweep, the gathering of initial impressions before the distortion of interrogation. His gaze first found the widow. Madame Cordelia Finch Hatton was not what he had expected from the description of a society bride. There was a stillness to her beauty, a composed, almost sculptural quality. She sat perfectly upright on a chaise longue, her hands folded in her lap. She was not weeping. Her large, dark eyes were dry and watchful, moving from one person to another with a chilling, analytical calm. Her mourning, Poirot thought, was of a peculiarly anticipatory nature. She was waiting. But for what? The reading of the will? Or the next move of an adversary? His eyes moved to the pantherish man by the window, Hugo Lester. He projected an air of controlled impatience, as if the murder were a vulgar interruption to his schedule. He caught Poirot's scrutiny and returned it with a cool, challenging stare, before turning back to the window, tapping his cigarette case against his palm. Here was a man of action and appetite, a man who would find a locked room not a puzzle, but an irritation to be bypassed by force or guile. The nervous secretary, Edwin Poole, was in constant, fluttering motion, straightening a crooked picture, collecting empty glasses onto a tray that a constable had clearly abandoned. His actions were those of a man desperate to restore order, to impose his familiar routine of service upon the chaos. Every few seconds, his eyes would dart towards the closed study door, as if he expected the dead man to emerge and berate him for the untidiness. An elderly, sharp-faced woman in mauve chiffon, introduced to Poirot in a whisper by Baldwin as Lady Genevieve Claverton, the victim's sister, sat rigidly in a high-backed chair. Her lips were pressed into a thin line of disapproval, directed not at the crime, but at the modern decor, the spilled drink on the rug, the very fact of the party. Her grief seemed rooted in propriety, not loss. A bluff, red-faced man named Colonel Archibald Dawson, an old friend of Sir Alistair's from his army days, paced before the fireplace, muttering about damned bad form and needing a drink before noon. His distress seemed genuine but simplistic, the outrage of a man for whom the world's rules had been violently broken. Finally, there was the sleek, ambiguous figure of Dr. Alexander Reed, the Finch Hatton's personal physician, who had been a guest at the party. He was leaning against the bar, quietly conversing with a police surgeon. His manner was professionally detached, yet his eyes missed nothing, observing the living with the same clinical interest as he must have observed the dead. "An interesting bouquet," Poirot murmured to Baldwin. The jealous rival, the new wife, the dependent sister, the old soldier, the confidential doctor, and the devoted secretary. Each a type, non? And each, I would speculate, with a motive as clear as the crystal of the murder weapon. "You see," said Baldwin, with a hint of triumph. "Straightforward. One of them's lying about the door. Probably the secretary. Or the wife and the rival are in it together. To assume is to invite error, Superintendent," Poirot chided gently. "You speak of the door. But what of the window? What of the champagne? The weapon was chosen, not seized at random. That is a message. Now, if you will permit, I would examine the theater of this tragedy." With a nod from Baldwin, Poirot turned his back on the living and, for the first time, approached the study where Sir Alistair Finch Hatton had made his final fatal toast. The stage was now set. The players were assembled, and Hercule Poirot, the master director, was ready to begin the delicate work of separating performance from truth. For Hercule Poirot, the violation of a room was as telling as the violation of a body. He stood on the threshold of the study. His neat, patent leather shoes aligned precisely with the door frame, and he did not enter. First, he must see the tableau as the murderer intended it to be seen, or as the chaos of discovery had left it. The room was a masculine sanctuary, all dark wood, rich leather, and the faint woody scent of cigars and fine brandy. The body of Sir Alistair remained slumped in the chair behind the desk, a silent, grim centerpiece. Poirot's eyes, however, did not linger on the corpse. They began at the periphery, sweeping in a slow, methodical arc. The windows, as reported, were fastened. Not simply closed, but the small brass catches at the top were firmly turned to the locked position. No scratches, no marks on the sills. The fireplace was a modern electric imitation. No soot, no hidden passage. The books on the shelves were orderly, their spines perfectly aligned. A trophy cabinet held sporting mementos, not a glass out of place. His attention then flowed towards the desk. The green-shaded lamp cast its dramatic pool of light, illuminating the central horror but also creating deep pools of shadow. The empty champagne coupe stood to the left of the blotter. The velvet-lined case for the pair of coupes lay open directly in front of the chair, its purple lining a regal backdrop for violence. The matching coupe was the murder weapon, its remnant, a sharp, cruel fragment, still protruding from the dead man's neck. Smaller shards of crystal were scattered across the desk like fallen diamonds. "The glass," Poirot murmured, more to himself than to Superintendent Baldwin, who hovered at his shoulder. It did not break upon the floor or against the wall. It was smashed with purpose. Here, upon the desk, to create the weapon. Obvious, grunted Baldwin. He surprised the intruder. They grappled, the glass broke, and the killer seized the moment. "None," Poirot said softly. "Observe the pattern of the fragments. They are concentrated on the blotter, directly before the chair. There is no trail, no scatter indicating a struggle or a throw. It suggests the glass was broken deliberately, carefully, in situ. And then, the sharpest piece was selected. He leaned forward slightly, his head cocked. And the stem, see? It is snapped. Not cleanly, but with a twisting motion. A strong motion. This was an act of fury, Superintendent, but of a controlled fury. It was not a panic. He finally allowed his gaze to settle upon Sir Alistair. The man's florid face was contorted in a rictus of surprise, perhaps even indignation. His dinner jacket was unbuttoned. In his right hand, loosely clutched, was a gold pocket watch, its lid open. Poirot's eyebrows soared. The watch. It is significant. He was looking at the time at the moment of death, or just before. Or he was just checking it, Baldwin countered. Man was waiting for his champagne. Perhaps Poirot conceded, though his tone suggested he conceded nothing. He pointed a delicate finger. But note the position. The watch is in his right hand. The fatal wound is on the right side of his neck. For a right-handed assailant standing before the desk, the most natural blow would be to the left side. This suggests the blow came from beside him, or even from behind his right shoulder. He then moved, at last, into the room. He did not stride, he glided, a small fastidious vessel navigating a sea of disorder. He examined the key, still in the dead man's trouser pocket. A simple Yale key. He studied the lock on the door, undamaged. He peered at the empty coupe, holding it up to the light. Not a fingerprint smudged its bowl. It had been carefully wiped. He drank a toast. Poirot mused. A private toast, with one of two precious glasses. With whom, I wonder? Or to what? His most peculiar action was to kneel, with a slight grimace for his creased trousers, and examine the Persian rug beneath the desk. He produced a small, powerful magnifying glass from his waistcoat pocket. "What is it?" Baldwin asked, his impatience yielding to curiosity. "The nap of the carpet. It is crushed here in a particular way. See these faint parallel impressions? Very close together." He looked up, his eyes green and bright. "They are not from a shoe. They are, I believe, the marks of knees. Someone was kneeling here, at the side of the desk, quite recently. The killer? Searching for something? Or hiding?" Poirot said enigmatically, rising and dusting off his knees. "Now, let us converse with the human element. The physical evidence, it whispers. But people, they often shout their secrets without knowing it." He led the way back to the drawing room. He did not immediately launch into interrogation. Instead, he requested a small table and 2 chairs be placed in an alcove, relatively private, but within sight of the others. It was a stage for confidentiality, but one that allowed the anxious glances of the remaining suspects to play upon it. His first witness was not the volatile widow or the arrogant rival, but the man who served as the clockwork of the household, Edwin Poole. The secretary sat down as if the chair were wired with electricity. He was a man constructed of angles and nerves, his Adam's apple bobbing above his stiff collar. "Monsieur Poole," Poirot began, his voice soothing. "You are the axis upon which this household turns. Your knowledge is paramount. Now, in your own words, describe for me the moments from when Sir Alistair announced his private toast until you discovered him." Poole's account was precise, chronological, and delivered with the cadence of a rehearsed statement. He took the 2 coupes from the case at approximately 12:03 a.m. He made his announcement, exited through the study door at 12:04, and closed it. I heard the key turn. I then returned my attention to the guests. I was ensuring the waiters replenished the canapes. I glanced at the door periodically. It never opened. At 12:20, Mrs. Finch Hatton asked me to remind him about the Krug. I knocked at 12:21. No answer. I tried the handle. It was unlocked. I opened it and you know the rest. The door was unlocked. Poirot repeated. Not merely unlatched, but unlocked. You are certain you heard the key turn when he entered? Absolutely certain. And during those 17 minutes, your eyes were on this door how often? Frequently, monsieur. It was my duty to anticipate his return. Did you ever look away for a prolonged period? Perhaps to settle a dispute? To fetch something from the kitchen? Poole thought. There was one moment. Just after midnight. Mr. Lester had spilled a glass of champagne on the Duchess of Marlborough's gown. There was a minor commotion. I went to summon a maid with a cloth. That perhaps took 90 seconds. And where was the study door during this commotion? In my direct line of sight from the service entrance, but I was distracted. Anyone could have approached it, tried the handle, perhaps even entered if it were already unlocked. Poirot finished. Merci, Monsieur Poole. One more thing. The pair of coupes, they were a wedding gift, oui? From whom? A faint blush stained Poole's thin cheeks. They were a gift from Mr. Hugo Lester, monsieur. Poirot's eyes gleamed. Indeed. How very generous of a business rival. You may go, Monsieur Poole. Please send in Mr. Lester. As the secretary scurried away, Poirot sat back, steepling his fingers. The first tiny contradiction had emerged. Poole claimed the door was locked, yet it was found unlocked. He claimed constant vigilance, yet admitted to a distraction. And the murder weapon was a gift from the man now waiting to be interviewed. The psychological tapestry was beginning to reveal its first tantalizing threads. Hugo Lester took the seat opposite Poirot with the languid arrogance of a man accustomed to dictating terms. He lit a fresh cigarette, ignoring the ashtray Poirot had neatly centered on the table between them. Monsieur Lester, Poirot began, you gave the deceased a very particular wedding gift. A pair of antique champagne coupes. I did, Lester replied, blowing smoke sideways. A peace offering. Alistair and I were competitors, but business need not poison all civility. Or so I thought. His smile was thin and humorless, a sentiment the murder weapon throws into dark relief, does it not? Tell me, what was the nature of this competition? Lester's eyes hardened. We were rival bidders on a government munitions contract, a very lucrative one. Finch Hatton won it 3 weeks ago by undercutting my bid with what I believe were illegally obtained figures. My company is now facing significant difficulties. The motive was clear, classical, and enormous. And so you gifted champagne glasses to the man who ruined you? Poirot inquired, his tone lightly skeptical, to toast his victory publicly. It made me look gracious. In our world, perception is currency. Poirot, he leaned forward, his voice dropping. But I didn't kill him. If I had, do you think I'd be so gauche as to use my own gift? It's a patently obvious frame. An intelligent observation, Poirot conceded. Where were you during the 90 seconds of the spilled champagne? Wiping down the unfortunate Duchess, Lester said without hesitation. It was my glass that spilled. I was the very epicenter of the commotion Poole mentioned. A dozen people saw me. I never went near the study. Poirot dismissed him and next received Cordelia Finch Hatton. She moved with a serene, gliding grace, her black dress whispering against the floor. Her composure was formidable. Madam, my condolences. This is a terrible shock so soon after the joy of your marriage. Thank you, Monsieur Poirot. It is a nightmare. Her voice was low, cultured and utterly devoid of detectable emotion. You asked Monsieur Poole to remind your husband about the champagne. Were you eager for his return? A faint, almost imperceptible tightening around her eyes. The party was flagging. He was the host. His absence was noted. And your marriage, madam? Was it a happy union? It was a partnership. Alistair offered stability, prestige. I offered companionship. She met his gaze squarely. You will hear rumors of my friendship with Hugo Lester. It is true we move in the same circles. We understand one another. But Alistair knew of it. He did not care, so long as appearances were maintained. It was a bold, preemptive strike against the obvious scandal. And the will, madam? Does this tragedy alter your circumstances? For the first time, a real flicker of feeling, cold triumph, passed through her eyes. It makes me a very wealthy woman. Monsieur Poirot. Alistair was generous. Her motive was as vast as Leicester's, and her alibi, she claimed, was simple. She was surrounded by guests the entire time, holding court as the hostess. She was a statue, perfect and possibly hollow. The sister, Lady Genevieve, was a torrent of repressed venom. He married a parvenu, a gold digger, our family name, diluted by that shop girl. Her motive was one of twisted family pride and, as Poirot gently extracted, financial dependence. Her brother's allowance was her lifeline. With his death, her future hinged on Cordelia's whim. Colonel Dawson blustered about loyalty, but revealed he had lost a fortune in a bad investment guided by Sir Alistair. Dr. Reed was calm, professional, and revealed he had recently treated Sir Alistair for a heart condition. The stress of his business dealings was severe. I warned him. When asked if the condition was life-threatening, Reed paused. With treatment, it was manageable. Without it, his time was limited, regardless. As the last interview concluded, Poirot sat alone in the alcove. The motives were laid bare: greed, revenge, jealousy, fear. Everyone had a reason. Several had opportunity during the spilled champagne distraction. But the method, the theatrical, brutal use of the crystal glass, gnawed at him. It was personal, symbolic. It spoke not of a cold business calculation or a greedy grab for inheritance, but of a deep, intimate fury. His eyes traveled across the room to the grand piano. Upon it, abandoned in the chaos, was a woman's small beaded evening bag. It lay exactly where Cordelia Finch Hatton had been sitting earlier. A thought, swift and clear, struck Poirot. He had seen no such bag during his initial observation of the study. But if it had been there, it would have been on the desk. Or perhaps, he rose and walked slowly to the piano. With a handkerchief covering his hand, he opened the delicate clasp and peered inside. A lipstick, a lace handkerchief, a small silver compact, and a single folded square of thick notepaper. He did not touch the paper, but he could see the embossed letterhead at the top. It was from the offices of Lester Armaments. The web tightened. The connection between the widow and the rival was tangible. But was it evidence of conspiracy, or merely the friendship they admitted? Poirot's mind returned to the watch in the dead man's hand and the kneel marks on the carpet. A story was forming, but it was a story with a crucial missing page. Someone in this room was not merely hiding a motive. They were hiding an action, a fleeting, desperate act in a locked room that Poirot had yet to fully comprehend. The folded notepaper gleamed in the subdued light, like a guilty secret. Poirot did not remove it from the bag. To do so would be to alert its owner that her privacy had been breached. Instead, he committed the sight to memory, the crispness of the fold, the boldness of the letterhead, and gently closed the clasp. The bag, a silent witness, now spoke volumes. It connected Cordelia Finch Hatton to Hugo Lester not through vague social whispers, but through the concrete medium of business correspondence. What urgent matter required a note on company paper at a New Year's gala? He returned to Superintendent Baldwin, who was in the study, irritably dictating notes to a constable. "Well?" Baldwin barked. "Get a confession out of one of them yet?" "Confessions are like champagne, Superintendent," Poirot replied. "They must be opened at the precise moment, or they go flat. I have, however, perceived a possible sequence of events." Baldwin's interest sharpened. "Go on." Poirot gestured elegantly. "Consider." Sir Alistair enters, locks the door. He pours 2 glasses from a bottle we must assume was already here. He toasts with someone. Who? Not a physical person, for the room is locked. Perhaps a memory. Or perhaps, Poirot's eyes glittered, he toasts a document. A business triumph. The stolen contract? Perhaps. He paced slowly. The killer does not enter through the door. They are already inside. They had concealed themselves earlier, behind the curtains, perhaps in the large cupboard there, waiting for the moment of private celebration. Preposterous. He'd have seen them when he came in, not if he was distracted, or if the room was dark save for this lamp. The killer emerges. There is a confrontation. The glass is seized, smashed, and used. The killer then unlocks the door. With a duplicate key, easily obtained by a wife or a secretary, slips out during the commotion, and relocks it from the outside with their duplicate. This explains why Poole heard the lock turn once, but found it unlocked. Sir Alistair locked it. The killer unlocked and relocked it. Baldwin chewed on this. The duplicate key, that points straight to the wife or Poole, or to anyone who had access to Sir Alistair's keys in the preceding days, Poirot amended. But consider the psychology. The use of the glass, Leicester's gift, is a double bluff, as he himself said. Too obvious, therefore it must point away from him, and towards someone wishing to frame him. Someone like the widow, who is now discovered to be in secret communication with him. A lover's pact to remove the husband, using the rival's own gift as a false trail. Baldwin's face lit with the crude satisfaction of a solved equation. By Jove, that's it. She hides. He creates the distraction with the spilled champagne. She does the deed, slips out, and later they share the fortune. It's always the wife or the lover. We'll break them. Poirot held up a cautionary hand. It is a theory that fits many facts, but it does not yet account for all. The watch in the hand, the marks on the carpet, the emptiness of the second coupe. If she toasted with him before killing him, why is her glass not present? Did she take it with her? A foolish risk. And if she was hiding, why would he pour 2 glasses at all? Details. Baldwin waved a dismissive hand. We'll sweat them on the key. I'll have Leicester and the woman in for questioning at the yard immediately. We'll find which one had a duplicate cut. Poirot felt a profound unease as Baldwin, with the bullish energy of a man who believes the chase is over, strode into the drawing room to announce he was taking Mrs. Finch Hatton and Mr. Leicester to Scotland Yard for further questioning. The reaction from the suspects was a symphony of distress. Cordelia went pale, her composure cracking into genuine shock. This is an outrage. Am I under arrest? Leicester was icily furious. You are making a catastrophic error, Superintendent. Edwin Poole wrung his hands. Lady Genevieve looked venomously pleased, and Colonel Dawson blustered about damned incompetence. Only Dr. Reed observed with quiet, thoughtful eyes. As the two were led out, Poirot retreated to the alcove, a citadel of quiet thought amidst the storm. The theory was neat, logical, and satisfying to the authorities. But it was wrong. He felt it in his bones, in the very asymmetry of the solution. It treated the human elements as chess pieces, not as the flawed, passionate, unpredictable creatures they were. The murderer had not acted with the cold logic of a conspiracy. The violence was too intimate, too messy. The locked room was not a magician's trick to be solved by a duplicate key. It was a statement, a psychological box. His mind returned to the kneeling marks. Not the posture of a hidden assassin waiting to strike, but of someone in a position of supplication? Search? He thought of the watch, open in the victim's hand. Time. It was all about time. Sir Alistair was checking the time at the moment of death. Why? Was he expecting someone? Or was he counting minutes? Perhaps the minutes of his own life. A cold clarity began to dawn. He had been examining the room as a crime scene, but not as a death scene. There was a medical dimension he had neglected. He rose abruptly and sought out Dr. Reed, who was preparing to leave. "Doctor, a moment. You said Sir Alistair had a heart condition. His medication, did he carry it with him?" Reed nodded. "Nitroglycerin tablets, in a small silver case. He was never without it. And did you see this case upon his person tonight?" The doctor paused, his professionalism overriding his desire to depart. "Now that you mention it, no, I did not. It would typically be in his left inner breast pocket. It was not there." Poirot had examined the body himself. The left inner pocket was empty. The missing medication case joined the missing second coupe in Poirot's mental inventory. Two small, absent objects. And then there were the knees on the carpet, beside the chair. Poirot's eyes widened almost imperceptibly. The false solution had blinded the police, but for Hercule Poirot, it had just illuminated the path to a much darker and far more cunning truth. With the police gone, taking their premature solution with them, a strained silence settled over the penthouse. The remaining suspects, Poole, Lady Genevieve, Colonel Dawson, and Dr. Reed, were like actors abandoned on a stage after the leads had been hauled away. It was into this quiet tension that Hercule Poirot re-entered, not as a fellow detainee, but as a new, more subtle force of inquiry. He did not summon them to the alcove. Instead, he moved amongst them. A polite, somber presence. His approach was no longer one of direct interrogation, but of shared reflection. A technique designed to lure the overconfident into a false sense of security. A tragic complexity, he sighed, addressing the room at large as he adjusted a perfectly straight picture frame. The good superintendent, he sees a simple pattern: the wife, the lover, the key. But life and death are rarely so symmetrical. Lady Genevieve sniffed. "I see nothing complex about a gold digger and a cad. Perhaps not, madam. Yet it leaves certain questions dormant." He turned to Colonel Dawson. "You were a friend of long standing, mon Colonel. Did Sir Alistair often indulge in private toasts?" The Colonel, grateful for a question that didn't accuse, puffed out his chest. "Alistair? Sentimental? Not he. A toast for him was a public affair, a way to show off his cellar or close a deal. Drinking alone? More a sign of trouble, I'd say." "Trouble," Poirot repeated, letting the word hang. His gaze drifted to Edwin Poole, who was mechanically polishing a water glass. "Monsieur Poole, when your employer took the two coupes, did he also take a bottle from the bar?" Poole started. "And no, monsieur. There was a bottle already in the study. I had placed it there earlier, at his request. The 28 Krog, from the special stock in the library cooler." So, Poirot mused, the private toast was premeditated. He planned it before the party even began. He addressed Dr. Reed next. "Docteur, a medical opinion, if you please. For a man with his heart condition, is the consumption of champagne advisable?" Dr. Reed considered, his fingers steepled. "In strict moderation, perhaps. But combined with the excitement of the evening, the stress of business, it was a risk. As was any strong emotion, Poirot echoed softly. He wandered toward the study door, left ajar. He sits, he pours 2 glasses. He toasts what? A memory? A ghost? Or perhaps, he turned, his eyes sweeping the room, a person he expected to join him, through this very door. Someone for whom a second glass was poured in earnest. He watched them. Poole looked confused, Lady Genevieve disdainful, the Colonel bewildered. Dr. Reed's expression was unreadable. But no one came through the door, Poirot continued, his voice dropping to a confidential murmur. And so, he is left with his toast and his thoughts. And his watch. He checks the time, repeatedly perhaps. He is waiting. And as the minutes pass, the anticipation curdles. Into what? Anger? Fear? Despair? He paused by the grand piano, his hand hovering near the beaded bag. The psychology of a locked room is not merely about how someone enters or leaves. It is about the state of mind of the person inside. Was he locking the world out? Or was he locking himself in for a confrontation from which only one person would emerge? He saw a flicker then, a minuscule reaction, not a start or a gasp, but a deliberate stillness, a freezing of motion that was more telling than any panic. It came from the most composed figure in the room. Poirot smiled inwardly. The hook was set. The false solution had made the true culprit feel safe, invisible. Now, by dissecting the victim's psychology, by painting a picture of a man waiting for a promised visitor who never arrived, Poirot had not addressed the killer directly. Instead, he had vividly described their own actions from the victim's perspective. He had forced them to relive those minutes from the other side of the desk. It is a pity, Poirot concluded with a sigh, turning away as if closing the subject. The police will not look beyond their simple story. The minor inconsistencies, the missing silver case for his pills, the curious marks upon the carpet. They will be forgotten. The full truth, I fear, will be buried with Sir Alistair. He announced he would take his leave, bidding each of them a solemn good night. As he collected his coat, he observed the frozen figure from the corner of his eye. The composure had returned, but it was now brittle, a thin veneer over a new and sharp anxiety. Poirot had accomplished his goal. He had not revealed his hand, but he had shaken the table. The next move, he was certain, would now come from the killer. A desperate person, once made to feel safe and then threatened anew, could rarely resist acting to secure their position. The psychological game had entered its final, most dangerous phase. The shrill, insistent ringing of the telephone shattered the peace of Poirot's breakfast the next morning. The toast was symmetrical. The coffee at the exact temperature, the marmalade pot scented. The intrusion was an affront. He answered with a frosty, "Allo?" It was Superintendent Baldwin, his voice stripped of its prior bluster, replaced by a gruff, troubled edge. "Poirot, you'd better come to St. Bartholomew's Hospital. At once?" "Has there been a development, Superintendent? A confession, perhaps? A deterioration?" "It's Dr. Reed. Someone tried to kill him last night. Nearly succeeded." Poirot's eyes narrowed. The psychological game had indeed provoked a move, but not the one he had anticipated. "I come immediately," he said, and cradled the receiver with a thoughtful hand. At the hospital, Baldwin met him in a stark, antiseptic corridor. He was found in his consulting rooms late last night by his housekeeper. Unconscious. A severe overdose of chloral hydrate in his whiskey. "Looks like a suicide attempt, but you do not think it is so," Poirot stated. "The note," Baldwin grunted, handing Poirot a single sheet of expensive notepaper sealed in a cellophane evidence sleeve. The handwriting was precise, sloping. "I can no longer bear the guilt. I saw Cordelia and Hugo plotting. I said nothing. For my silence I am complicit. Forgive me. A. Reed." "A confession of sorts," Poirot murmured. "And yet it conveniently reinforces your theory of the conspiring lovers. How is the doctor?" "Alive. The housekeeper found him just in time. He's conscious but weak. Claims he remembers nothing after pouring his nightly drink." Poirot was granted a brief visit. Dr. Reed lay pale against the white pillows, an intravenous line taped to his arm. His professional composure was eroded by pain and confusion. "Docteur," Poirot said softly, pulling a chair close, "you wish to take your own life, and yet you choose chloral hydrate, a slow, uncertain method. A medical man would have access to quicker, more certain means." Reed's throat worked. "I wasn't thinking clearly. The guilt. Guilt for what you saw? Or guilt for what you did?" Poirot let the question hang. "The note mentions you saw Madame Cordelia and Monsieur Lester plotting. Where and when did you witness this?" At the party. In the library hallway. Before midnight." "What were the words you overheard?" Reed closed his eyes, feigning exhaustion. "I cannot recall precisely." Hushed tones. "Something about after he's gone and the key." "Je comprends," Poirot said, though his tone implied the opposite. He leaned closer. "A curious thing, Docteur. Last night I spoke of Sir Alistair's missing silver pill case. Tonight you are found near death. It is as if the mention of that case provoked a crisis. Why would that be?" A faint sheen of perspiration appeared on Reed's brow. He did not answer. Poirot stood. "Rest, Docteur. Do not trouble yourself. The pieces, they begin to arrange themselves. The duplicate key, the overheard plot, the attempted suicide, it is all very neat. Too neat. It has the appearance of a narrative constructed after the fact." He left the hospital with Baldwin. "Well?" demanded the superintendent. "His note corroborates the lover's guilt. It corroborates nothing except that Dr. Reed is a frightened man," Poirot retorted. "Tell me, was a glass found beside him?" "One glass?" "Yes." "A whiskey tumbler?" "One glass." Sir Alistair also had one glass. A man attempting suicide in remorse does not typically wipe his glass clean of fingerprints. Superintendent. Yet Dr. Reed's glass, like Sir Alistair's champagne coupe, was found impeccably clean. A curious habit for two different men in two different states of distress, n'est-ce pas? Baldwin stared. "You think someone tried to silence him?" "But the note was typed. Save for the signature. Easily forged. Someone feared the good doctor was becoming a liability. They knew the police would see a guilty conscience, not an attack." Poirot's mind raced. The attempt on Reed was a reckless move, revealing the killer's growing desperation. It also confirmed that Poirot's psychological probing had struck a nerve. The killer was not Cordelia or Hugo. They were safely in custody. The killer was still free, moving among the remaining suspects, tightening the frame. The second crime had not simplified matters. It had layered deception upon deception. But it had given Poirot a vital insight. The murderer's primary weapon was not a shard of crystal, but knowledge. Medical knowledge. And now, that knowledge had been turned on its source. The pattern was becoming horrifically clear. This was not a crime of passion or greed alone. It was a crime of cold, clinical calculation, disguised as a hot-blooded act of fury. And the calculation, Poirot now saw, had begun long before the first chime of midnight. Back in the ordered sanctuary of his apartment at Whitehaven Mansions, Hercule Poirot performed a ritual of mental purification. He dismissed the noise, Baldwin's bullish theories, Reed's convenient suicide, the obvious framing of the lovers. He returned to the core, the immutable facts of the locked room. He arranged 3 items mentally before him: the open watch in the dead man's hand, the nail marks on the carpet, and the missing silver pill case. "Consider the sequence," he told the empty room, his voice low. He enters at 12:04. He pours 2 glasses. He toasts. He checks his watch. He dies. But from what? The glass to the neck would cause rapid exsanguination. Yet the watch is in his hand, not dropped. Would a man being violently attacked clutch his watch? None. He checks the time because he is waiting for something to happen. The medical dimension Dr. Reed had provided was the key. A heart condition. Nitroglycerin tablets. A man under stress, consuming champagne. Poirot's eyes flew open. He had been thinking of the murder as a single violent event. But what if it were 2? He reconstructed the scene with this new terrible lens. Sir Alistair pours the drinks. He toasts, perhaps to his own impending victory or settlement. He drinks. He waits. And then the expected medical event occurs, an angina attack, severe, brought on by stress, alcohol, or something introduced into his champagne. He feels the familiar, terrifying pain. He grasps for his pill case. It is not there. Why? Had he forgotten it? Or had it been removed? He checks his watch, a helpless, panicked gesture. How long have I been feeling this? How long do I have? He slumps, the pain crescendoing. This is when someone enters. Not through the door, but from within the room. From where? The large, deep cupboard? No, that would have been discovered. The nail marks. Someone is already on the floor beside him. Not an attacker approaching, but a confidante, a helper, who had been there all along. Someone who had entered with him, or before him, and hidden not in the cupboard, but under the vast, fortress-like desk. A place no one would think to look. They emerge as he succumbs. They kneel beside him. Do they administer aid? Or do they ensure the opposite? The pill case was missing because this person had taken it earlier, ensuring the attack would be fatal. The second champagne coupe was empty because the hidden accomplice had not drunk from it. They had used it to deliver the very substance that induced the attack. It was then carefully wiped and set aside. But why then the brutal theatrical stabbing with the crystal? "Pour cacher la vérité médicale," Poirot whispered. To hide the medical truth. The stabbing was not the cause of death, but a macabre curtain drawn over it. It created a scene of passionate violence, pointing to a crime of fury and personal hatred, deflecting all suspicion from a cooler, more calculated murder by medical means. It also created the locked room puzzle, a dazzling distraction for the mind. Who had the knowledge to induce a heart attack? Dr. Reed. Who had the opportunity to hide under the desk? Someone who could move through the apartment unseen before the guests arrived. Edwin Poole. Who had a motive that was not greed or revenge, but something quieter, more profound? Perhaps the sister, clinging to a dying family name. But the kneeling figure, that suggested intimacy, a closeness that permitted such a position without immediate alarm. Sir Alistair would not have allowed just anyone to kneel beside him in such a vulnerable moment. Then Poirot remembered a small, overlooked detail from the crime scene report, a single long auburn hair, caught on the intricate carving of the desk chair's leg. It had been dismissed as coming from the wife or a maid. But Cordelia Finch Hatton's hair was jet black. The maids wore caps. There was one person in that penthouse with long auburn hair, worn swept up in an elegant, but not impervious, style. A person whose position, whose very presence, would have caused Sir Alistair no alarm if she were near him. A person whose medical knowledge, while not that of a doctor, was extensive enough. A person who hated the new wife, who depended on her brother's fortune, and who viewed his marriage as the final, unforgivable betrayal of family blood. Lady Genevieve Claverton. The pieces clicked into a chilling new configuration. The motive was not just money, but a twisted preservation of lineage. The means were not blunt force, but a poisoner's subtlety, masked by a butcher's stroke. The locked room was not an impossibility, but a simple trick of hiding in plain sight, aided by the victim's own anticipated medical crisis. Poirot had his hidden clue. Not a fingerprint or a weapon, but a sequence of events and a psychological understanding so horrifying that even he felt a frisson of disgust. He knew the truth, but to prove it, he would need the killer's confidence to crack. He would need a final grand performance where the pride of the murderer would overcome their caution. He would need to convene a second gathering, and this time, he would be the master of ceremonies. 2 days later, the same drawing room in the Finch-Hatton penthouse held a very different assembly. The festive decorations had been stripped away, leaving the angular modernity of the room exposed and cold. Superintendent Baldwin stood by the fireplace, his expression one of profound skepticism warring with a reluctant curiosity. Beside him, looking pale but defiant, were Cordelia Finch-Hatton and Hugo Lester, released from custody due to lack of evidence and the dramatic new development of the attack on Dr. Reed. Edwin Poole fidgeted near the service door. Colonel Dawson sat stiffly on the sofa, baffled but obedient to the summons. In a wheelchair, brought from the hospital under protest, was Dr. Alexander Reed, wrapped in a blanket, his face ashen. And seated in a high-backed chair that resembled a throne of judgment, her mauve dress severe against the upholstery, was Lady Genevieve Claverton. Her hands were folded, her expression one of impatient endurance. The stage was set. The actors were present. All that was missing was the director. He entered precisely at the appointed hour. Hercule Poirot was a vision of fastidious elegance, his moustaches waxed to perfection, his attire a symphony of neatness. He acknowledged the gathering with a slight bow. "I thank you all for your indulgence. The events of New Year's Eve have cast a long shadow. It is time to disperse that shadow with the light of truth." Superintendent Baldwin believed the case solved. He was in error. Dr. Reed attempted to take his own life out of guilt. That, too, was in error. They were both victims of a calculated deception. He paused, letting his gaze rest on each face. The crime appeared passionate, a crystal shard driven into a man's neck. A crime of fury, but this was a masquerade. The true murder was cool, clinical, and committed several minutes before the blow was struck. Sir Alistair Finch-Hatton was in fact dying of a fatal heart attack when he was stabbed. A collective intake of breath filled the room. Lady Genevieve's lips tightened. He entered his study, expecting a private interview. He poured 2 glasses from the bottle his secretary had placed there. He toasted. And then, the pharmacological agent he had ingested, likely a potent stimulant introduced into his champagne, took effect. His weakened heart rebelled. He felt the pain. He reached for his nitroglycerin case. It was not there. It had been removed earlier. In his distress, he looked at his watch, a helpless, instinctive gesture. He was waiting for medical aid that was promised, but which would never come. He slumped, incapacitated. Poirot turned his attention to Dr. Reed. "You, Docteur, were the unwitting catalyst. You provided the medical knowledge of his condition, and perhaps the specific substance that would induce a crisis. But you did not administer it. Your guilt stemmed from knowing your information had been used, and from a deeper, more personal loyalty that blinded you." Reed closed his eyes, unable to meet Poirot's stare. With Sir Alistair helpless, Poirot continued. The person who had been hiding under the vast desk, a most inelegant but effective refuge, emerged. This person knelt beside him, not to help, but to ensure the end. They took the second champagne coupe, the one they themselves had used to toast, and shattered it on the desk. They selected a shard and delivered the post-mortem blow. It was an act of theater, of misdirection. It created the locked room mystery, for this person had been inside the room the entire time. They then unlocked the door, slipped out during the distraction, and used a duplicate key to lock it again from the outside. The duplicate was easily obtained. It had been in the possession of this trusted person for days. All eyes now darted between Poole and Lady Genevieve. The secretary shook his head frantically. "I didn't. I couldn't." "Non, Monsieur Poole, you could not," Poirot said. "You lacked the necessary medical knowledge. And you lacked the particular intimacy that would allow you to kneel beside your employer in his final moments without causing immediate alarm. That intimacy belongs only to family." He turned slowly to face the high-backed chair. "Is it not so, Lady Genevieve?" The room froze. The old woman's eyes became chips of flint. "How dare you?" "I loved my brother." "You loved your name," Poirot corrected gently. "You loved the Finch-Hatton lineage, which you saw being diluted by a shopgirl. You were financially dependent on his whim. His new marriage threatened to cut you off entirely. You saw the future, your brother's fortune, and your family's social capital passing to a woman you despised. You could not bear it. This is fantasy. I was in the drawing room all evening. You were seen. But you were not continuously seen. Before the guests arrived, you had ample time to hide the duplicate key and to secrete yourself in the study. You knew his routine, his medical vulnerabilities. You promised him a private, conciliatory toast after midnight, a sisterly peace offering. He agreed and instructed Poole to place the bottle in the study. You entered the study before him. You hid under the desk, a humiliating position for a woman of your pride, which only underscores the depth of your hatred. You toasted with him, introducing the stimulant into his glass. You waited. When the attack rendered him helpless, you emerged, removed the silver pill case from his pocket to ensure the outcome, and then, with cold fury, created the brutal spectacle that would point to a crime of passion, not of calculation. "Proof," she spat. "Where is your proof?" The long auburn hair caught on the chair leg. "Your hair, madame." The kneel marks on the carpet, consistent with the posture of someone in a long, tight gown. Your extensive, if amateur, knowledge of pharmaceuticals, a hobby you have quietly cultivated for years. And most of all, the attack on Dr. Reed. You feared he was weakening, that he might reveal your conversations about Sir Alistair's health. You forged the suicide note to point once more to the lovers, and you attempted to silence him permanently. In your haste, you repeated a telltale habit. You wiped the glass clean, just as you wiped the champagne coupe clean. You cannot abide disorder, even in your murders. Lady Genevieve said nothing. Her rigid posture was her last defense. "It is over, madam," Poirot said, his voice final. "The truth is not in a single clue, but in the pattern. A pattern of a mind that values blood over people, lineage over life, and cold order over messy humanity." Superintendent Baldwin, after a stunned moment, stepped forward. The damning evidence of the forged note, the hair, and the testimony of a pharmacist who had supplied Lady Genevieve with the stimulant weeks prior would soon be laid bare. But in that moment, in the silent, horrified room, the psychological truth was enough. Lady Genevieve Claverton did not break. She simply rose, smoothed her mauve gown, and offered her wrists to the superintendent, with a disdain so profound it was more confession than any shouted plea. The victory, Poirot knew, felt hollow. It always did, when the motive was so petty and the destruction so complete. Lady Genevieve Claverton offered no further confession. Her silence, as she was led away by a grim-faced constable, was more eloquent than any outburst. It was the silence of absolute, unrepentant conviction. She had acted, in her own mind, not as a murderer, but as a surgeon excising a cancer from the family tree. The brutal stabbing was merely the scalpel's final decisive stroke. In the days that followed, the evidence Poirot had alluded to was painstakingly assembled. The Chelsea pharmacist, an old family acquaintance, reluctantly confirmed Lady Genevieve had purchased a quantity of ephedrine under the guise of treating winter fatigue. The stimulant, combined with champagne and stress, would have been more than sufficient to trigger a fatal cardiac event in a vulnerable man. The duplicate key was found secreted in her vanity case, wrapped in a lace handkerchief. The handwriting on the draft of the forged suicide note, discovered in her writing desk, matched exemplars of her own. Cordelia Finch Hatton and Hugo Lester were formally cleared. Their release, however, was into a world irrevocably altered. The scandal, though now refocused, clung to them like Thames fog. Their relationship, born of mutual understanding and ambition, would forever be viewed through the prism of murder. They left London separately, their fortunes intact, but their reputations stained. Dr. Alexander Reed, upon recovery, resigned his practice. His silence, motivated by a misguided loyalty to the Finch-Hatton family and a deep-seated horror at how his medical counsel had been weaponized, cost him his career. He retired to the country, a broken man who had aimed to heal, but had instead become an unwitting instrument of death. Edwin Poole, the perpetually anxious secretary, found a strange peace. The order he craved was restored, not in service, but in the finality of the solution. He accepted a position with a less tempestuous employer, his nervous energy now channeled into mere efficiency, not dread. Colonel Archibald Dawson, ever the blunt instrument, summed it up for the press with a soldier's brevity. Bad blood always ends badly. He returned to his club where the story, suitably embellished, earned him many free brandies. For Hercule Poirot, seated once more before his symmetrical breakfast, the case left a familiar, metallic taste of melancholy. The triumph of order over chaos was, as always, a victory. Yet the motive, the shriveled aristocratic pride that could commit a brother for the sake of a name, was peculiarly vile. Superintendent Baldwin, to his credit, paid a visit. His manner was stiff, but his respect was genuine. You saw what we didn't, Poirot. We saw a hot crime. You saw a cold one, dressed up in hot clothes. The clothes were very convincing, mon ami, Poirot replied, delicately sipping his coffee. But they did not fit. The fury was a costume, worn by a mind that despised disorder above all else. Lady Genevieve could not tolerate the messiness of her brother's new life. So she created a different mess, one she believed she could control. In the end, she could control nothing, not even the single hair that betrayed her. Baldwin shook his head. A clever devil. The most dangerous devils are always the clever ones, Poirot said. And the most tragic ones are those who believe their evil is, in fact, a virtue. The following week, a small, neatly wrapped package arrived at Whitehaven Mansions. Inside, nestled in fresh velvet, was a single, perfect champagne coupe of crystal so fine it seemed to hold light itself. A card accompanied it, in the precise handwriting of Edwin Poole, a token from the estate, the sole survivor of the pair. It was felt you alone might appreciate its clarity. Poirot placed the glass on his mantelpiece. It was beautiful, a testament to human artistry. And it was empty. He regarded it with a somber eye. It would hold no champagne, no toast, no poison. It would stand as a reminder, not of a clever solution, but of the profound emptiness that lies at the heart of the most perfectly planned crime. For all its brilliance, murder, like the glass, ultimately contained nothing but the reflection of a deformed soul. He gave a small, decisive nod and turned to the day's newspaper. The world, happily, still offered other puzzles. Less tragic, one hoped, and preferably ones that did not interfere with the morning routine. Order, after all, must be maintained.